Hello and welcome to our weekly Integral Love Relationship Web Jam. My name is Martin Utschig and I'm the author of Integral Relationships, a Manual for Men, and my new book, Sex, Purpose, Love, Couples in Integral Relationships Creating a Better World. And today I'm honored and thrilled and excited to be joined by Dr. Bert Parlee. Welcome, Bert.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
So I had you in my ear a few years ago for a few months when I was listening over and over to an interview with Adyashanti that you did. And so it's really exciting to get to know you in person after I listened to that so often. And I want to invite our listeners and viewers to participate by typing in your name and where you join us from at the bottom right of your screen. And there you can also type in your questions and your comments. And if you are single and looking for a partner, you may also share your integralsingles.com screen name or your Facebook profile name there. You can also join us live if you feel called. There is a little hand symbol at the top right of the screen. And once I accept your request, a small plugin will be downloaded to your Google Chrome browser works best, and a test of your camera and microphone will run before you can come online. And please note that this webcam is recorded and you give your permission to be included in the replay. So I'm going to introduce you, Bert, from your bio on your website. You bring over 25 years of both business and clinical experience to your work as a leadership coach, which you do mainly now, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And half of your work involves identifying and leveraging innate client strengths. And the other half of your work involves an appreciative inquiry into the ways that people get in their own way, as well as we all do this. So I will be curious what an appreciative inquiry is. We have that as one of the first questions. And you write that the sooner we can clearly become aware of these self-defeating habits, the quicker we'll be able to make more adaptive choices that will lead to our desired outcomes. And of course, my vision and mission of desired outcome is more healthy, thriving love relationships in this world with hopefully a shared purpose that makes the world a better place. And we talk about these limiting beliefs and behaviors as our shadows. So we already had a few sessions with Dr. Mark Foreman about shadows. So this is a great setup for diving deeper. And your work involves deploying a range of models and approaches that shine light on these shadows. The resulting insights allow us degrees of control and mastery, whereas before these shadows were experienced as chains. So that sounds like great work. And this quote, that Adyashanti said in that interview, do you remember how long ago that was? Probably 10 years or so?
Probably. It was a while ago.
Yeah. It was a while ago when you did these kind of interviews that I'm doing now. If I remember correctly, Adya, for those who don't know him, he's a Zen Buddhist teacher and does obviously spiritual retreats. And he and his wife had this idea to do a couples retreat once that was supposed to be of that typical spiritual nature, the work that he does. And he realized how many problems around shadow, very generally speaking, the couples had in their relationship. And he said in that interview with you, and I quote that very often, the proof of the depth and embodiment of your realization will be seen in your love relationships. That's where the proof is in the pudding. If it all collapses in your relationships, or in our relationships, we have some work to do. And people do have a lot of difficulties in their love relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So without any further ado,
you're turning it over to me?
I'm turning it over to you. And I don't know if you want to start reflecting on this quote a little bit and you also write in your bio that you are married and you co-parent with your wife. So I'm also always curious a bit about your relationship and how that enriches your life.
I'll be happy to share what that's like. When we had talked before, Martin, I think you had asked me if I would review some of my earlier life experiences with some of the travel, Ken Wilber, meeting a lot of people like that in the early days. So greetings, everybody out there. For those of you who are watching, as Martin says, my name is Bert Parlee, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and most of my work now is with executives, working with individual CEOs as well as executive leadership teams. Another dimension of my work is with an organization called Young Presidents Organization, where I work with usually CEOs in groups of 8 to 10 people. It's fundamentally like interpersonal group process work that I used to teach at graduate schools in the Bay Area. In fact, Mark Foreman, who you just had on, was one of my in one of my interpersonal process groups at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto. And before all of that, though, I'll just say a little bit. I was somebody who grew up in Eastern Canada, born in Prince Edward Island, growing up in St. John and New Brunswick, beside Nova Scotia. And I had a very kind of rough upbringing, pretty lower class family life, lived in a poor neighborhood, a lot of gang activity, a lot of craziness in those ways, but I was always interested in what seemed to be real. I got the travel bug when I was young, and first trip was to North Africa and Europe right after high school with a couple of friends, and that was so enthralling to me that I made a commitment that after college I would go around the world. And on that trip, I unintentionally happened upon an experience one night in a Bangkok hotel room. I had a guitar on my back and was playing music in little bars through Southeast Asia to make my way through. And there was a man who was telling the woman I was traveling with at the time, a German woman, about a Tibetan Buddhist meditation course that he had a great experience at. I listened in to that experience and had one of those conversion experiences. I'd studied philosophy and psychology and political science and the humanities, but I'd never been exposed to non-dual mysticism. And just hearing it from him redirected all my travel plans to go and attend this. Spent several months in that monastery and then down through India for about a little over a year, studying with a lot of people. There's a recent program on Netflix called Wild Wild Country. One of the people I studied with there was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, came to be known as Osho, and his path was all about, unlike most of the other disciplined ashrams and monasteries it was almost the path of sex and drugs and rock and roll. So it was difficult making sense of what spirituality really is. And it was about that time that I started reading Ken Wilber. Somebody gave me a book of his in Calcutta, I believe. It had just been released. And I was really taken by the way he was able to synthesize and integrate Eastern approaches of mature life into spiritual realization with Western psychology, infancy into adulthood. And when I returned to the States, I went to Canada. I quickly moved to California, lived for a year in Santa Cruz, then went to Naropa Institute to do a master's in Buddhist and Western psychotherapy. Continued to read Ken Wilber very much, back to San Francisco to do a doctorate in clinical psychology at CIIS. And during that time, I started a Ken Wilber discussion group, which Ken learned about and invited me out to his place in the late 90s. We became fast friends. And when the Integral Institute began, the first branch meeting, we had a variety of branch meetings, and integral psychotherapy was the first one. So we had people like Francis Vaughan and Roger Walls, David Data, Robert Keegan, Michael Murphy, George Leonard. Anyway,
the whole gang, so to speak.
Yeah, my hero figures, many of them. And it was wonderful for me to be invited by Ken to lead that group, as well as be his chief of staff and facilitate subsequent branch meetings of business, art, politics, ecology. We had a range of things, and then to lead a range of workshops on those things, 5-day workshops at the Westin in Westminster. So that's just a little bit of my history with Ken. That first weekend I visited with Ken, Don Beck had his first meeting with Ken as well. So the three of us had a really fun time that first week, talking about everything imaginable late into the night. But I do know that the purpose of this call is really about relationship. So I want to come back into that and just share a little that a lot of the work I've done, with myself and working with others is around couples work in general. And I continue to work with couples and marriage counseling, and thought I would maybe go through, because there are some models and information. How long do we have here today, Martin, by the way?
Till 11.
Oh, till 11. So, okay, good. Because I do want to share a few things with your listeners and offer some, what I hope are maybe valuable mental models that people can gain some insight from, and if valuable, maybe put to good use. So maybe if we can shift, if you can toggle me to the screen.
Can you switch it on?
I can, I think. Let me try this.
I can only switch it off, but not on.
Okay. How was that?
Perfect.
Okay. Excellent. Great. All right. So, I've been playing with this little double entendre, which I call blind spots in perspective. Both the putting blind spots in perspective of how we look at the unconscious shadow dimensions of how we strive to make meaning of things, as well as blind spots in the perspectives we take altogether. So as we go into this, there was a book written by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a Tibetan Lama, spiritual teacher. Yeah. And you're familiar with that one, Martin?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite spiritual books, which unfortunately perished in the fire. But so right. I always have these little reminders. Oh, there is another thing I remember now that went when my house burned down. Anyway, yes, that's a great book.
Well, in it, what he talks about is those of us who are striving on the spiritual path to become more realized, more enlightened, more loving, more caring, more awake, more conscious. The ego is extremely skilled at co-opting almost any of these efforts into its own purposes, so that we almost develop very conscious, awake egos, which Trungpa describes as spiritual materialism. And since you had mentioned what you had before when we spoke, Martin, about that Adyashanti quote, I thought I'd give a Roger Walsh one, which is similar. So if you believe you've made good progress on the spiritual path, give it a test by asking your spouse for feedback on how they think you're doing. Yeah. And that kind of invitation is extremely valuable, because your spouse or your children will be very generous in giving you feedback about ways that you may be doing well and ways that you may be falling short of that. Yeah. And as someone who is striving to be a conscious lover and person who is generating that energy in a relationship, feedback itself is fundamentally important. Sometimes we like what we call positive or affirming, validating feedback. We're not as fond of disconfirming feedback, but on the spiritual path, as Trungpa and others have said, developing an appetite for that kind of information about ourselves if we really want to be cultivating a learner mindset as opposed to a knower mindset, it can really change the quality of ourselves and our relationships. The Adyashanti quote, just so people can see it, the one that you had mentioned a moment ago, down here so people can actually read it, as you say. The depth is really in the intimate relationship we have with another. We can bypass, as Trump would call it, spiritual bypassing, the materialism by really taking the temperature of our relationships in our intimate relationships. So sometimes I like to just put an image or two up to begin to frame what I'm going to talk about as a both and way of being in relationship with our love partner, as opposed to an either or, which is almost a default way of being. So this image is called Two Young Expectant Parents Meditating on the Birth of Their Child, which you can see if you look up into the trees. You'll be able to see on the left the baby's large head being framed by the branches. The feet are on the right in the kind of trunk of the tree coming up there. Right. So it's a intentionally ambiguous image. And here we have an image of the assumptions we naturally make about life, and they're very sweet and endearing and very touching and heartfelt when we see them going on in younger people, because how would they know? It's, wow, that looks like what I'd be doing if I was that age. But when we make such assumptions later and we leave them unexamined such that they kind of morph into conclusions and then develop kind of hardwired belief systems, that's not so useful. Now, Martin, let me ask you this. Have you seen this video by Brene Brown on blame?
This one I don't think I have seen.
So what I may do is just run this for your viewers here. It's quite beautiful. It's got a good sense of humor, and it really identifies one of the biggest impediments to love in our relationships. And that's the way that we almost reflexively and automatically, when something goes wrong or things aren't going the way we like to in our life or our relationship, we can very easily and unconsciously fall into the blaming trap. So this is a good frame of that. Do you mind if I run this? It's just a
we have
couple
to see
minutes.
If we get the audio in. No, of course, if we get the audio, then...
Well, we'll give it a try.
Yeah. Oh, yes. While we're waiting for Bert to come back, when he shared about, when we get positive and negative feedback, I just spent a few days with my daughter after I came back from Turkey, and that immediately brought up some thoughts. There's a lot of love and deep connection between me and my daughter, my oldest daughter. But as in any relationship, of course, there are also some wounds and some difficulties. As most of you know, I've separated from my wife in 2002, and Laura was 11 at the time. And so it's just interesting as they're adults now to see how they become more and more aware, and we become more and more aware of how our relationship has, or how I have impacted their life, and how my relationship life with my ex-wife and then with the women that I dated impacted my daughters, and also to see how it differently impacted my daughters. And of course, that Adyashanti quote, and I'm just waiting for Bert to come back. That Adyashanti quote had a deep impact on me, as I was really flabbergasted when I entered the spiritual world in 2000 after I had met Eckhart Tolle, and then spent 5 years at the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Rosa. How many people saw relationships almost as an impediment to their growth and their spiritual path and their enlightenment. So when I heard Adya Shanti saying that, of course, I was deeply inspired, and then looked a little bit more into what different Western spiritual teachers were saying and the lives they were living, and realized that most of them, including Eckhart Tolle and Adya Shanti and Roger Walsh and that Bert mentioned, realized that the quality of our love relationship is really the ultimate test of our spiritual realization. If we define spirituality as that we can stay present and surrendered to everything that arises in our consciousness, then, as we just saw in the video, that then stop this, and I guess this is where Bert will go with this as when he comes back, is that we get easily triggered, and most often, of course, triggered in relationships, because, as somebody said, our relationship wounds that we all endured. And so, as I was just saying, many people maintain that these deep relationship wounds that it's the right word, incurred when we were little, often before we were even really fully self-conscious, they can only be healed in relationships, because that's where they get triggered. And there is possibly even, relationship wounds that were carried forward from our parents to us. We now know from attachment theory, for example, that the type of attachment style that our parents had, if they were anxious or avoidant or secure or anxious avoidant, which is this confused stage, that this is very often transferred to their children. And then, of course, if we have children, there is a good likelihood that our attachment wounds will be handed forward to our children. And so we can only break this cycle if we engage in real conscious relationships with a focus on healing and growth. And so I'm always critical when I hear people, well, we'll just be together as long as the relationship works and is fun. And if any problems emerge in the relationship, then it's time to move on to somebody else who we can have fun with, and the relationship is easy, instead of doing the work that is necessary to heal our deep relationship wounds. And that's, of course, why I'm so curious to invite people like Bert Parlee, who have a lot of experience around working with these wounds and making this shift, helping to make this shift in couple, to find out when does it make sense to stay in a relationship and to work on this wound, or are there other differences that are really hard to overcome, like as I write in my books, if we're at different levels of consciousness or spiritual development, maybe one partner gets triggered way more often than the other, and it converts into this potentially asymmetrical relationship where, if the couples stay, that one person becomes more of the empath and helping the other person to heal his or her wounds, and not receiving the same amount of feedback and support and help in healing our own wounds. So that's an ongoing topic that I was discussing with Dr. Mark Foreman, because if we love that other person, but we become the rescuer instead of the helper, or are seen as somebody who can rescue the other person, then these relationships can be problematic.
One of the things you mentioned there that's salient, sometimes in terms of working through difficulties in a relationship, which naturally arise because everybody wants to rule the world. That's natural.
Yes.
We want to prevail when there's difference, and that blame video kind of shows the strivings for kind of prominence or dominance that we have when something goes wrong. We like to be right. We don't like to be wrong. And we also, I think, as you were saying, after the infatuation stage ends and we start seeing the big hairy warts that we all have, it's easy to switch from what was initially idealization of the other to more of a devaluation of the other, kind of black and white thinking in either way. And I was reminded, sometimes I've heard this quote from Maya Angelou as I'm working with couples. Let's say a wife or a woman would say, in quoting Maya Angelou, that when somebody shows you who they really are for the first time, believe them. And I think for people, I think what the intention of that meaning was by Maya Angelou is, if you are a spouse and you find yourself in a relationship which you really think is not healthy, even abusive, if you will, then you do well not to sort of find ways to make excuses, explain away, reframe that is in any way healthy or acceptable, that it's really important to set a limit and establish a boundary and recognize that nothing is good there. Now, the way that can be, I think, misconstrued sometimes is everybody has moments in relationships and in life when we're not at our best. And when we're not at our best, we sort of act as drama in different ways, like blaming, like we saw in that fight. Brene Brown is wonderful because she is so open and honest and vulnerable. She talks a lot about vulnerability and its value. And in being vulnerable, sometimes we have to absorb, our partner's upset and frustration and even little bits of anger, even moments of rage. So I've often cautioned people against that quote by Maya Angelou, that just because you see somebody erupt in a moment, not be at their best, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've shown you their true self, who they most always are and are always going to be that way. It's sort of like one of the differences between Freud and Jung's conception of the human condition.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Freud, both of these men were absolute geniuses. Truths that they tuned into and preferenced almost. And if anything, Freud was a bit of a reductionist because he seemed to believe that the human condition was fundamentally based on sex and aggression, what we might call an elevationist, that he thought we are true, which is why this and have bad moments, not being at their best, and end up in the drama triangle. I don't know if Mark referenced that when he was on the call. Did he talk at all about the drama triangle?
No, he didn't.
He didn't.
Yeah,
well,
and I'm curious.
It is it's a frame worth mentioning for people. And it was developed by Dr. Stephen Cartman in the 60s. He was a practitioner in a school of psychology at the time, transactional analysis. And he noticed in working with people in family life and organizational life that when we're not at our best, we tend to revert back to one of the few roles, or we actually end up playing usually two or three of all three of them. And it's really based fundamentally, first off, as the victim. So when I am feeling like something is unfair, or why are people asking me things that I can't really be expected to do much of, there's a sort of what we call victimhood energy that comes into play. It's different than victimization. If you're carjacked, on your way home tonight, you're really being victimized. That's true, and that really happens if someone hurts you in whatever way. But we're talking about victimhood, and there's quite a bit of that in our culture now. There's a lot of the upside of sensitivity, which the boomer generation really ushered in the 60s with this whole postmodern green mindset of, equality and sensitivity and relativism and pluralism, multiculturalism, diversity. But the downside is we can actually, in being overly sensitive, slip into being a victim in a situation. And when we're there, we're having usually a pity party. We feel powerless. It's a poor me situation, and I can't do anything. I have no agency or authorship.
Yes.
Now, for every victim, we have a persecutor. And as a victim, I see the persecutor as the problem. And sometimes they really are. Somebody who, if I'm a persecutor, my energy is to put you down. I want to dominate you. I want to blame. Speaking of Brene Brown, I want to tear you down. And, I do it with sarcasm, with being overbearing, harsh, and all sorts of ways that I play the persecutor role. Now, the other part of the triangle is, and I think you did mention this, maybe Mark mentioned it, the rescuer.
Yes.
So that energy in the system, whether it's a family system or an organizational or a peer group, whatever, and when I'm a rescuer, I experience myself as sort of the analgesic, the pain reliever. I want to really nurture and supplicate the victim, make them feel good, tell them what they should be doing, but in a kind and gentle way. Let them know it's not their fault. People shouldn't be expecting that much of them. When I'm in my rescuer energy, I'm actively looking for victims. And if I can't find one, I'll even create one, because that's what I have to live out in that role. Likewise with the other ones. So when I was teaching at Notre Dame for a while, one of my colleagues there's name was David Emerald, and he wrote a book about this based on an experience. He talks about it in the book. He was in a marriage, a love relationship with his wife. They wanted to conceive and had a child and a family. Weren't able to. It was learned that he wasn't able to conceive from his side. And he thought, well, we'll just, find some workaround here. We'll adopt or do what we need to do if we want to have a family. But rather than that happening, she kind of very quickly left the marriage, and he was crushed. And, that ended up moving him into therapy and working with his pretty acute depression for a while. And that's when he learned about the drama triangle. And he thought, well, this is really valuable, but kind of what do I do with that? And he actually came up with what he called the antidotes to the drama triangle. And he talks about that as the empowerment dynamic.
Okay.
And the empowerment dynamic is where we shift out of any of these roles in what he calls the dreaded drama triangle, the DDT, into our empowered correlates in empowerment. So as a victim, in empowerment, I shift to become the creator. So rather than focusing on my problems and wallowing in those, I shift my focus to what is it that I really want here? What's my vision? What results would I like to see happen? And my intention and activity becomes baby steps, just small steps in the direction of that. That's the sustainable way forward, rather than magically making everything all better. The persecutor, away from drama into empowerment, becomes the challenger, the heartfelt challenger, that rather than tearing somebody down, my intention as a challenger is to elevate and uplift the person, to help them ascend as a creator. And I do that by making sort of heartfelt challenges that, I trust you can do better than that. I know how wonderful you are with this. I really believe that if you just give this a try, this can happen. I'd really like you to try this perspective on and see what it's like for just a moment if you looked at things in this way. There's a variety of things to do to become a challenger. And the rescuer, who is just trying to codependently enable the victim in an indulgent way, instead shifts to become the coach who asks powerful questions. Questions like, what is it that you think you will hope to do or plan to do? What price are you paying right now, and what price are other people paying for you keeping things exactly as they are at the moment? What's the payoff even that you're getting by not having to challenge yourself in a certain way? So as a model, there's a book called The Power of TED, and it's one of the things that in the work that I do, whether it's with executives, couples, or whatever else, people find this extremely liberating and useful and helpful. We call it sticky because it's an idea that sticks.
Yeah. There's a book with that title.
Yeah. With the drama triangle, it intuitively makes sense to your teenager or your 10-year-old. They get it right away. They know the schoolyard. And it's actually everywhere. The same dynamics are going on in boardrooms all the time. Control and power, strivings for dominance. And, it's something I just recommend really highly as one of the little mental models I wanted to share.
Yeah. Can you tell the name of that author? And is there one book or a few books to look at?
There's a couple, and he's just about to release a new one, but the main one people would want to look at is called The Power of TED, TED. And TED is actually an acronym for the empowerment dynamic. And the author's name is David Emerald.
Emerald.
Emerald. Yep. And I've got a lot of beautiful slides that I was so excited to be showing you and your listeners, but not today.
Not today.
Not today.
And we can talk about maybe making them available, on the website.
I can send out a PDF definitely to you for people so they can look at all these.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
And another model, just a couple of little things I wanted to share.
So just to come back, because interestingly, I just spent 3 days with my daughter, and that came up. She's a doctor now and a helper, and so how can we talked about this difference between being the rescuer and the helper. So this is very apropos for me right now, but. How do you determine if somebody is really a victim, right, of circumstances, or and maybe just feeds on people, who try to rescue them, and don't really want to accept the help. They rather move on to the next person who they can feed on. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Sure. Yeah. The way it's like with mindsets, a lot of your listeners are familiar with integral theory, I think.
Yes.
And, it's sort of the same way that we can, if we look at types of people, if we're thinking of Enneagram types or Myers-Briggs type indicators or anything like that, we can, likewise with the drama triangle, we can listen to the language that people use. If I tend to be oriented as a kind of red power-oriented mindset, my language will reflect that I make meaning about what's right, and what's right is what I want. If I'm more amber or blue in spiral dynamics terms, my language is going to be about, duty and service and self-sacrifice and order and loyalty, and likewise with the other colors. So here, in the drama triangle, if somebody, let's say you're really trying to be a good creator and challenger and coach with somebody, which is really offering them support in how they might be able and willing to shift out of that. And as we know, the only thing that likes change is a wet baby on a good day. So it's not like it's easy to do this kind of stuff.
Yes.
So when I'm feeling like a victim in my life, I kind of wallow in it, and we all do a bit. But you can tell if someone's chronically there if there's no interest, no curiosity, no willingness to experiment or try something different. In other words, the most skillful creator / challengers in the world, let's take a Gandhi or a Christ or Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
These were incredibly transformative beings, but they didn't have the power to change people who want to wallow in drama at all. And, frankly, they get killed for their efforts. So when you use this model, if people read this book, just about everybody who reads this book, it's becoming more and more popular because it makes simple, good sense. We'll see ourselves in these roles, and we can bounce around in different ones depending on the context we're in.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do, because right away we'll see ourselves, and we'll see our intimate partner, and we'll see the roles we play. And the last thing we want to do is, if you're my partner, Martin, the last thing I want to do is, hey, I'd love you to read this. It'll really tell you what a victim you are. Don't ever do that.
Yeah.
That way, that'll turn people off right away. But if you share with people how you see yourself in these roles, if they become familiar with the model, then there is a safe space that's created in the intimacy, in the relationship, and they become more willing and able to explore into and maybe inquire and wonder what they might be playing in these ways.
But the difficulty is often and I experience that in relationships, where you love a person and you want to be with them, and obviously you get something out of being the good person or feeling to be the rescuer in the relationship. And if you don't see anything changing on the other side, it's still very hard to walk away with that without feeling guilty.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what my daughter and I struggled in these situations, because there's this feeling, well, these people need to be that they deserve to be loved as well. And if I don't help and love them, then who will?
That's right. And in the East, I remember the first time I heard this, I was in a Tibetan monastery with, several High Lamas, and the Dalai Lama was giving a talk. And the term he referenced for that kind of rescuing energy was idiot compassion. Which, is very well intended, and we want to do that. But there's something, I think, about, it sort of brings up this other little model, if I could take a moment with it. Are you familiar with polarity management?
I don't think so, no.
Maybe not. Ken Wilber rightly calls it the mechanics of integral. Integral theory and methodology is a pretty big, unwieldy beast. There's a lot going on, and it's very complex, and it can make people's eyes glaze over quickly. And make it stop. But polarities are ways of looking at ourselves in life and in relationships in particular, to be able to recognize that we naturally have preferences. Jung talked about this a lot. Jung felt the core polarity in the universe was the masculine and the feminine. And there are a lot of qualities and characteristics that we can identify as masculine and feminine in the ways that we do. And they make a lot of sense. So there, in polarities, these are ways that we sort of frame up complementary values that sort of need each other over time if we're going to sustain a relationship, a family, a nation, an organization. So some of the simple examples we give of polarities is the inhalation of the breath and the exhalation of the breath. We need both. If we hold on to one too long, we get its downside. Yes. And then we get the downside of both. Think of activity and rest. In relationships, one of the ways this goes on a lot is some people are more natively masculine in their energies. They're more into looking at situations objectively, rationally, with reason, kind of empirical mindset. Yeah. And it's quite abstract. And sometimes the other person, the more feminine dimension, whether it's a male or a female, man or woman, is much more narrative in the way that relate to things, more subjectively oriented. The style is more organic and flowing, inductive. And the thing is, there's an up and a downside to both of them. When like you want to be able to appreciate, like when people come in to me when I'm working with couples, a common example will be they're having a problem, called a teenager, let's say, and I'll ask the wife, so what's going on? Let me know what your issue or your challenge is. And she says, well, he is, he's really just so controlling and oppressive and overbearing and harsh and punitive. He's kind of like a Nazi. And I said, wow, okay, well, what's your sense, sir? What's happening? Well, she is so kind of allowing of anything at all to go on, so indulgent and enabling and codependent, that, our kid gets away with murder and there's nothing I can do to help teach him or her any discipline. Yes. And they're both coming from their own preferred. They both think they're being, let's say a challenger or a coach, respectively. The wife thinks she's being a good coach to the adolescent. The husband thinks he's being a good challenger. And they're probably each right to a degree. Yeah. There is an upside to, what they're trying to do. But we're programmed, if we have a preference, and we always do, if we have polarities like candor and diplomacy, I use that a lot in working with people. Think like the upside of candor, for instance, is, I'm frank and forthright, in sharing where I stand on difficult issues. I don't hold back from wading into hard issues. And if I'm into diplomacy, if I prefer that pole, because I'm going to need both of these for conscious communication. And if I don't balance them well, I'm going to have unconscious communication. So my upside, if I'm more the diplomat, is, hey, I listen carefully to points of view of others. I find tactful and measured, moderate ways to communicate difficult issues. I show flexibility on issues when that's needed. But what I don't tend to see, let's say my preference is candor, and I stand for straightforward, direct, honest communication. Yes. I don't see when I sort of lapse into becoming more of a persecutor, where my communication is one way. It's my way or the highway. Yes. I express myself more in bold, intense, and harsh fashion. I don't, convey wishy-washy or flexible things when I feel strongly about something. I shouldn't do that. And likewise for the other person, the downside of diplomacy is, my always open approach to other points of view is often the cause of confusion. I avoid dealing with hard issues or conflict directly. So putting these things up on the boards for people and showing them the up and the downsides of both kinds of these things can be really liberating as a mental model. So the book I'd recommend there, Barry Johnson's book called Polarity Management.
How do you spell Johnson?
Johnsson.
John.
Son.
Son. Barry, Barry.
RRY, yeah.
Okay.
And again, this is another very sticky mental model that when people see it, it can be immediately liberating. And there are many, just in terms of relationship, there are so many good polarities around, like candor and diplomacy. There's firm and flexible boundaries. We could spend hours talking about boundaries. Some of us naturally have firm ones. Some more flexible. There's an up and a downside to both. Anyway, I'm watching our time evaporate here. Let me stop and see where you're at.
So it's really, if you are, so like want to help, but you realize you become more of a rescuer and you become used in the relationship and used up in a way. What is the inner trigger that will allow you to walk away, even if the other person says, "Oh, you abandoned me, and you're not the person and you no longer love me, and you're a totally different person." The blaming and the shaming of the, when we set that healthy boundary and walk away.
Exactly. Well, the polarity, I try to work with them as I begin that. The first move is to put up on my polarity kind of map that I can write on.
Yes.
Conditional love, regard or respect, and unconditional regard and respect. And there's a place for both in relationship, or in any work life environment, that we should love and respect people's humanity for who they are unconditionally, without them having to do a darn thing. And there's a beautiful upside to that, and there's a real upside to conditional love, where we are able to identify and express conditions of satisfaction that will make this relationship work for me. Here are the kinds of things I kind of want and need from you. And they can be quite simple, but certain things are there. It's a condition of mine that you don't beat me, and then they become increasingly subtle. So that's one way of beginning to work with it. And then, of course, the unconditional love is, what we do call the rescuer. We can bring those together, those models. But one of the big things that, has been a rightfully popular book over the years is, when I say no, I feel guilty, because people will tell us, if they want to be rescued, that we are abandoning them. So this is where our grace and grit gets involved, that to recognize that we don't have to buy what somebody else is selling about what we're doing. They may tell us that we're being this way or doing that, especially if we're not meeting their needs, and they're telling us we're disregarding or abandoning them. How do we say, with politeness and courtesy and dignity, as well as resolve and strength, thank you. I believe you believe that, with all your heart. That's not my experience. And I'm having another experience with you. I'm very sad, and it's not easy, and it is hard for me to do this. But I have to trust my own inner experience, that I'm saying no out of love, as a hopeful way that you may change. And there's nothing, I frankly don't have the power to control that. So that sometimes I'll even throw up the gentle love, tough love polarity to look at.
That right now brings up a deep feeling in me, and another conflict, and maybe we can briefly, you can address that, and we can go a little bit over, is, so I'm single right now, and obviously I promote healthy relationships. And there is a deep longing on one side to be in a relationship, in an intimate relationship, and on the other side there is also, how would I describe that? I don't longer want to go into relationships where I don't feel met as an equal, and there is this imbalance, and so I right now feel this, on one side, dissatisfaction of being single with all the freedoms, and I can live my vision and move the integral relationship vision forward without being encumbered, is that a right word, by a relationship? And on the other side, there is this longing, obviously, to walk my talk and to live, what I'm preaching and teaching and advocating for.
Well, thank you for your openness with that, Martin. When I watched my early life, as somebody who grew up and became attuned to, all the dimensions of what at the time was called the counterculture, the world was alive and dynamic and open to, in the same way that, for example, polyamory is being explored now as the relationship's open and people want to transcend the limitations of the pair bond. So, in our days, it was free love.
Yes.
And love the one you're with sort of energy. But, and that works for a few people. Most people discover when they honestly try it, and I've talked to a lot of people, remember talking with Roger Walsh and Francis Vaughan about their experiments with that in the 60s, and it was just too damn difficult to really be in that and try and maintain your ego in a healthy way. But, I think there is, something about, when we talk about an integral love relationship, there's part of us that wants to, the upside of this, the enlightened side, is wanting to have it all. We want to fire on all cylinders. We want to have this incredible chemistry and arrows and this felt sense of not being able to keep our hands off each other, and it's hot and it's intense and it's just juicy and alive, and that's beautiful. And then on the other hand, we also want to be best friends and enjoy sharing the same things with one another. We have similar interests, involvements, we have the same taste, the same political and social opinions about things. And then, we want to have a shared spiritual kind of sensibility with one another. We both like to meditate or do certain kinds of spiritual practices. We might like to have the same kinds of philanthropic involvements. Something I found in life when I was young and I tried to have it all, telling myself a story, it was integral. I was really, just from my own experience, because I think some people can have that, I had to learn to identify what the essentials were, because in my early life, I showed a lot of genuine goddesses the door because they didn't fulfill something on my list.
Yeah.
And I look back on that now as basically just my narcissistic self-involvement in not being able to identify what was key for me, what I need in a relationship, what was essential, what was non-negotiable, and what was something I could get fulfilled otherwise. So for me, it was the chemistry thing. It was, just wanting to be really close and intimate in that touching, feeling way of just wanting to be intimately close physically with my partner. And I didn't need to burden her with the obligations of knowing all the philosophy and spirituality that, I might have been lit up on fire with. So I don't know if that is something that gets in your way. What would you say is a next step or two for you in becoming available for a right relationship?
Well, where my mind is set on is that the one most important thing for me is to share this, what I feel my passion and my purpose to support singles and couples in co-creating healthy relationships. And I just cannot see myself being in relationship with someone who doesn't share that passion and purpose. And then, of course, the other thing is this attachment of being with someone who's at an integral or higher level and has some level of spiritual realization and interest in shadow work. And so if I use these three things as a criteria, that of course limits the pool very quickly.
Right. And good for you for identifying it. Those categories were on my checklist as well. And it may be very different for you in your explorations and what you discover. But for me, most of those things were the ones I had to hit the delete button for, as it turns out. In other words, I am very happily married, to, my wife, and, we have a great family life, and, she's become interested, I'm proud to call Adyashanti a friend, and we've visited with him, and she actually really likes that, but she's more a kind of traditional mindset, certainly a lot of orange and green energy as well, but I remember taking her, to Boulder one time years ago for an interval event, and there was an authentic relating exercise being led by an old friend, Robert McNaughton. And she was like, she was horrified to be in that situation of eye gazing. She thought that was a cruel thing of me to do, to subject her to that kind of experience.
Wow.
And of course, I love all that stuff, right?
Yes.
But we connect in ways that are just personal and, very loving and caring. And we have our disagreements and conflicts as well, but it really works. But we have some very dissimilar interests as well. So there's something in marriage that we talk about as symmetry and complementarity.
Yes.
So the symmetry are the ways that we are aligned around something and we think and feel the same about certain things. And complementarity are the ways that we're actually different, but we, in our differences, actually create a larger whole with that difference. And anyway, for what that's worth.
Yeah. So I have to delete the delete button.
Well,
or at least one.
Experiment. Yeah, but allow yourself to just entertain that, put that on the back burner of your brain, and see if it's absolutely true that you have to have somebody fulfill the same kind of purpose and vision and core values and principles that you're aligned with, or mysteriously enough, and rather paradoxically, might there be an even closer connection with someone who's surprisingly dissimilar from what you're like?
Yeah. Thank you. That's really great advice for me and probably for some of the people who are online or watching the video later.
Well, you guys are anything like I was.
I definitely can feel that wealth of information and depth, and it was wonderful. And I feel this synchronicity right now in what you shared, specifically about this, the triangle. And I definitely want to look up these books because that's very alive in my relationships with my daughter and what she's experiencing, and certainly in my life, so I'm glad we talked about this conflict of opening up to relationship, which will require certain compromise, and on the other side, staying true to my path. So I will more deeply look into that. And I think that's probably a conflict for a lot of people who feel a strong conviction about what their purpose in life is. To say, it's more important to live my purpose than to be in a relationship. And then I also see all the negative sides, that we can get really off track if we don't have the feedback from a spouse of our being, our growth, our path. So.
Yeah, well, that thing you're just mentioning about feedback, I was going to talk about other mental models like the Johari Window and the ladder of inference that we climb, where we have assumptions and jump to conclusions and they solidify into beliefs. And if we don't examine that, climbing back down our ladder, looking for disconfirming information about the absolute truth of what we believe, we're in trouble. But just those models of the drama triangle, the empowerment dynamic, and polarity management are excellent shadow models, ways of looking in a way that's very sticky for people, that people will be able to relate to. Anyway, I'll send out these slides to you that you can distribute to your folks. They can see if any of that makes sense to them.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very generous of you.
You're welcome. And
if people want to contact you, what is the best way to find you?
I guess my email is Bert, B-E-R-T, at Integral Coach, INTEGRALCOACH.com. My website is bertparlee.com. And I'm fine with my phone number being out there. It's still a San Francisco number. It's 415-233-2238.
38. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
This was amazing. And appreciate you for your generosity of your time and experience, sharing that with us.
Well, I love what you're doing, trying to bring in how to create conscious relationships and a loving way in the world. So you've got a beautiful dharma and purpose in your life, Martin. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bert, and thank you, everyone, for hanging in there and being online. And you all have a great Memorial Day weekend. And hopefully we see you back next Saturday, where we have a couple from San Diego on the line who model a little bit maybe what my vision is of a relationship too, having this shared mission and purpose to help singles in finding a partner and co-creating healthy relationships. So tune in again next Saturday at 10. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.